Hello, I'm Craig Rotzler, the Senior Conference Manager at FDA News. Welcome to today's webinar on effective auditing for manufacturing quality. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please feel free to prepare your questions. We're going to conduct some live question and answer following the presentation. And if you'd like to ask your question, you just simply type it in the area provided and press enter. The questions are not going to be viewable to the other attendees. I'd like to encourage you to ask your questions at any time during the presentations, and we will take them at the end. I'd love to introduce our speakers for today. Susan Schniepp is the Distinguished Fellow of Regulatory Compliance Associates. She has 40 years of quality assurance experience in the pharmaceutical industry, serving in leadership roles with Allegra Laboratories, Oso Biopharmaceuticals, Serial, Abbott, and Hospira. And she's also joined by Seyed, Khorashahi, Executive Vice President of Medical Device and CTO Regulatory Compliance Associates. She has more than 25 years experience leading R&D teams in all aspects of developing safety critical medical devices, and has held leadership roles at Covidien or Medtronic, Baxter, and Beckman Coulter. And additionally, we have Stephen Lynn is the Executive Vice President of Pharmaceuticals, also with Regulatory Compliance Associates, and he has 20 years of quality and regulatory compliance related experience in pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, medical devices, blood, plasma, and tissue industries. It's great to have you all with us, and I'll turn it over to Sue to get us started.
Great, thanks Craig, and thanks Seyed and Steve for joining me. I thought we'd approach this a little bit differently today, since you've all at points in the past have seen me do a lot on data integrity and a lot on quality metrics and aging facilities. So we're going to try to wrap this all up because we're talking about auditing for manufacturing, right? And that encompasses all of these various areas. So with that, what I want to stress is that when we talking about this, we're going to be talking about data integrity, quality culture, aging facilities, investigations in CAPAs and deviations, and risk management as all areas that you should pay attention to when actually auditing for manufacturing quality. So let's talk about what's going on out there, because in our first topic, we're going to talk about data integrity, and I want to know what's going on out there because we still seem to have, as evidenced by the next slide, 483s for CAPA and investigations, we still seem to have some issues going on with data integrity. So I want to look at what is data integrity, and you've seen this definition before, right? And I'm not going to dwell on any of these, and Steve and Seyed, jump in when you want to. I want to get through this background because what I want to do is have the discussion with Steve and Seyed and myself around how you tie these all together when you're auditing for manufacturing quality. So let's go to the next. This is just your ALCOA principles. And you can see there's some regulatory citation, the 21 CFR. And then, of course, we have ALCOA Plus. And so when you're considering all of your data and any of your systems, your quality management system, your change control system, your investigation systems, all of those should take into account ALCOA and ALCOA Plus. All right, so let's go on to, these are examples of data integrity. You all know that, right? And what I want to do is get on to, I think we have to remember, well, the next couple of slides are just going to be a recap of some significant events that have happened around data integrity that we should remember. So I have this quote because we seem to not remember as we move through and change. So you can see that there was the generic drug scandal, we had the Barr decision, we had Ranbaxy and Able Labs, all were examples of things that went wrong when you didn't pay attention and didn't have data that was accountable, legible, extemporaneous. You get the picture, right? So why did all of this happen? And you can see that I'm pointing to some of the industry changes, right? There's been, since the time of the generic drug scandal, and there's been contract manufacturing has come along. Generic companies have grown. There's biosimilars and biotech have emerged. And we've had a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And we've also had, and I think Seyed will talk about this later, an emergence in data, computer systems and artificial intelligence and big data and all of that. We didn't have that way back when the bar decision was around, and when back even as Able Labs, there wasn't as much as we had on now compared to now what we do with data. So let's talk about, this is just a listing of where some of the data integrity guidances come from and the available information to you. And then I just like to throw in little cartoons. I think you get the point on this one. If you're into the, all of your computer systems and your IT systems, you really need to keep keep those secure, because that's where you can have problems. As you can see, if we had gone through one of the previous versions of the slide deck, you would see where I've cited a lot of warning letters that are available to you if you go look on the FDA website, that are citing passwords that are shared, not having secure login requirements, and all of that sets you up for the accusation that you might be manipulating data. So let's go on to the second area I think one would want to take a look at when you're trying to gauge a company's manufacturing quality, is certainly the quality culture. So back in 2005, Janet Woodcock made this statement about having a, pretty much self-regulated industry. And I don't know that we've realized it yet. I think, we're getting better, but I don't think we've realized that outcome. And so the quality culture piece really fits in with this vision, because it's talking about how you as a company treat your data, treat your information, treat your employees. And it's that speak up culture. So I think you want to take a look at that whenever you're auditing a company. You really do want to take a look at their culture, and you really do want to make sure that they're encouraging their employees to speak up. And so this is obviously another cartoon, and it's not what you want to do, right, to and get ready for an audit. So if you see this kind of behavior going on in somebody that you're auditing, that's not a really good sign. So let's take a look. In these same data documents that we referenced for data integrity, I'm now cutting out sections, and you can see what's highlighted in the red is everything about quality culture. So the data integrity documents that have been issued by the MHRA and the PICS, all boil down to, you can see each, and the World Health Organization are boiling down to quality culture as a part, and it's very clearly tying quality culture to data integrity. I think that's very interesting, and I think it's what everybody needs to be aware of. And so I encourage everyone to go back, take a look at these readings, take a look at these documents, and get familiar with them, because I think that it's very important that you understand where all of this importance on quality culture is coming. So with quality culture, it's one of those subjective kind of things. So you have to be aware of the surroundings. It's a little bit different. It's much different than a compliance audit because you're going to be talking to people and their viewpoints. And so this is just a little bit of encouragement to you in terms of what to look for. And as you can see, you know, many of the things that count don't count, right, for quality culture. You're looking for, it's not so, it's a subtlety. It's a, how do people behave? Are they happy? Is the data, are people speaking up? Are they encouraged to speak up? So, and then this slide actually kind of tells you when you might be in trouble, you know, signs of a culture that's gone bad. Now, how do you measure, you know, you're auditing, how do you measure quality culture? Well, if you take what you want to do is tie quality attributes, which are characteristics of a quality system. They can be verified, they're a tangible program. And some of those examples of a quality attribute in your whole total system would be deviations reporting, change control, CAPA systems. All of that, those are tangible, right? And you can kind of measure them. Now, if you say quality attributes, right? Those are traditional, right? And then you might have others where you have some more mature qualities. So basically, we're saying that a quality culture is a scale. And some cultures will be a little more mature and some will be a little less mature. Okay, and so that's kind of where you need to be thinking about quality culture. Okay, so let's take a look at the next bit of information. You want to make sure the facilities are maintained. And so this is where we get really interesting concepts of FDASIA tied drug shortages to quality metrics. This is where, if you've heard about quality metrics, this is where this comes out. And again, Steve and Seyed and I will be discussing more of this in detail. But in the quality metrics piece that came out of drug shortages and reporting, having the FDA report to Congress every year, what came out of that was metrics that should be presented to the FDA prior to an audit. And some of those metrics were like CAPA and deviations, okay? And the thought was if you could get a handle on those metrics, you would be able to predict or help predict when a company might have trouble that would put manufacturing problems, that would put products at risk and potentially on the drug shortage, okay? So that's kind of what was going on here, and that brings us to this whole concept of aging facilities. There's a lot of facilities out there, and you can see by this next slide some of the causes for the drug shortages. There are a lot of facilities out there that are aging and need to be updated, and that's hard to do when you're manufacturing daily, you know, 24/7. So we just want to kind of give you a little background that aging facilities, it does contribute to drug shortages. It does contribute to data integrity issues. We'll talk about that. And then there's this series of slides. I've just given you a feel for what the current situation is out there, what's going on, and what we might consider, right? So you can see we can have, these slides will be available to you, so don't worry that I'm running them. I think it's important that we get to the conversation with Steve and Seyed. You'll learn much more from the stories that we tell. Okay, so, and this is, right, an example of what's going on. So here's recognizing a facility is aging. You know the signs. You have a lot more increase in waste. Probably deviations are increasing. Your yield isn't as good. Okay, so how do you change that? Well, there are, you know, if you are going to modernize, there are some things that you have to face, such as you've got to file with the FDA and let them know you're modernizing. And how do you do that efficiently? Particularly, let's say you're a contract manufacturer and you want to modernize your most busy line. How do you shut that down? If you think of the old way of thinking, how do you shut it down for 2 years while you wait for the FDA to approve your prior approval supplement? And we'll talk about situations like that when we get to the discussion. And here's your choice. You can keep driving the old car or you can buy a new car, right? And I think you have to um, uh, look at how to slow the aging process if you can, and some of the regulatory expectations around how to update your facility. And that will, again, help you. Okay, so let's look at the regulatory aspects. Oh, sorry, I'm behind one. Investigations, we all know investigations, deviations, CAPAs, complaints, all feed in to the health of an organization and the health of the manufacturing. Okay, so I like quotes, so just, be inspired by, we need to do hard work, and investigations are hard work. They are required. And you can see here, I'm going to run through a series of slides. This is all laid out for you where it's required in the Code of Federal Regulations and where it's required in Europe, UDRLEX Volume 4. The expectation that you will investigate deviations and you will thoroughly investigate them and you will find a root cause is certainly well laid out in the regulations. Okay? And here's some other citations. So don't forget ICH. They have Q10, which is the pharmaceutical quality system, the modern one. And we have ISO, and you don't want to forget, anywhere you can get information on how to perform deviations and investigations is fabulous. All right, so this is just this next slide is just a bit on the CAPA process. And then this is just, I like to look at this slide in a way of, as you see, everything kind of funnels into investigations in CAPA. And I think it's very important that we understand this kind of circular, TAT is track and trace. Some companies use that. Raw material hold. You can see where everything can revolve around audit findings. All can revolve around CAPA, CAPA and investigation and deviation management. All right, let's take a look at risk management. I think everybody should have a risk management plan. It's another area that I would look at if I were auditing for manufacturing quality. Do they have a plan? If a supplier goes out of business or a supplier has manufacturing troubles themselves, is there a risk management plan? You can see that ICH Q9 is talk about risk management. And I think it's important that you understand, that they have risk assessment in place so that we can prevent drug shortages and we can provide high quality products. Now, I'm not gonna, what I really want to say about risk management is I think risk management promotes critical thinking. And I think whenever you're in a situation auditing for anything, even, if you're not an auditor, but your job is deviations or investigations, it's always great to have critical thinking and risk-based decision making when you're looking at these things. None of these boil down to checklist mentality. If you're in that checklist mentality, That's not a good place to be, because if that's all you do is check the boxes, you're never going to find a root cause for some of these things. So I just want to make sure that we understand that. To me, risk, quality risk management plans, investigations, and DB, all of these things are important, and measure the health of your manufacturing quality systems. So in summary, I think when auditing for manufacturing quality, you should focus on the culture, investigations, the facility maintenance, data integrity issues, and of course the risk management program. I think if you focus on those areas, you will get a really good feel for how your manufacturing quality is going, okay? And that's in there. And then I want to leave you with this concept of auditing. 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered with water. The other third is covered with auditors from headquarters. I think that's really important. You are going to be audited no matter what area of the business you're in. In pharmaceuticals, you are going to be audited by a client, by your internal audit group, by regulators. So you should get used to kind of looking at these things holistically, and trying to find the different areas that kind of fit together to give you a holistic picture of where your organization is at. And with that, I want to leave you with actually one of my favorite quotes is, quality is always fashionable. And with that, I want to bring in Seyed and Steve so we can get this discussion underway. You guys there?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Can you hear me all right? So I want to start off telling a story to get your guys' input on all of this. And my story has to do with when I started at a company, brand new, head of quality, and I decided to familiarize myself with what was going on in the manufacturing arena. So I picked up the deviations book, and I was going through, and I was reading all these deviations, and I found one that was a repeat, and it was the same operator, Jose, and he kept making the same mistake. He kept forgetting to sign his batch record in a certain spot in the middle of the batch. And every time, there were about 30 of these observations in about 3 months. And I thought, okay, I'm going to read what their conclusion was. And they said, well, it was operator error or human error, and that they retrained Jose. So I called in my staff that was responsible for these deviations, and I said, what's going on here? You retrained this guy 30 times. Is he the right person for the job? And they assured me that he was a fabulous operator, just very diligent. And I said, but something's wrong if he can't sign the batch record in the right place. Well, that's just Jose. So Jose happened to work the second shift, and I thought, has anybody really interviewed him? Oh, well, yeah, but it's just human error, and so we've just chalked it off to human error. And so I went and interviewed Jose, and I said, what's going on? Why do you keep missing this? And he said, well, the batch record is inconvenient to sign at that point, because if I have to sign it then, what I've got to do is step out of the sterile core, because he was making injectable drugs, degown, sign the batch record, regown, and go back in. And all that time, the product is running unattended. So I don't do that. And I then sometimes forget to sign the batch record when I'm done. And I thought, oh, isn't this very interesting? Because the problem is not Jose. It's not human error. It's a poorly designed batch record. But because nobody really interviewed Jose and just said, oh, he just doesn't remember to sign, They never changed the batch record and never got to root cause. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about from this example. One, human error and why we always chalk things up to human error. And two, I believe what's the most interesting question is, what about all the other operators who were making this product? Have I compromised those batches? Because to me, while Jose was wrong but right, everybody else was right but wrong. And I think that's a whole area to get into to discuss. So let's start with Steve on human error. And and what I'm kind of getting at too, if you have a limited amount of time to focus in on quality, manufacturing quality, the first place that I would go, and maybe Seyed and Steve, we'll start with Steve and we'll go to Seyed. The first place I would look at: deviations, investigations, complaints, and CAPAs.
Yep.
Steve.
No, I fully agree with you. That was, you took the words out of my mouth. And then I would add, I do it even when I'm doing audits myself. I want to see the metrics. See what metrics they're tracking. What are they tracking? Why are they tracking it? And it kind of gets to the indication of if they're tracking it, hopefully it shows that it's important to them. But on the flip side, what aren't they tracking? Why aren't they tracking it? For instance, you're tracking deviations, like number of deviations, but like timeliness of deviations. Are you just tracking it for your, most deviations are due or investigations, you got a 30-day time frame. It's standard you see across the industries. So are you tracking outside of that? So number of kind of deviations that were extended, so your extensions for that. Are you tracking number of extensions? But also, is it in the procedures on what they do about those extensions? Who needs to approve those extensions? Kind of stuff like that. Those are some of the things that come to mind around investigations. Yep. Seyed, what do you think?
Seyed.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you guys. At the end of the day, if you look at this issue with Jose and the fact that it was a repeat issue, I think you hit the nail on the head, Sue, with saying that obviously the root cause investigation did not find the actual root cause until you got a chance to go and interview Jose, and then you found out that it is not the human error, it's not a training issue, it is the process. I mean, the risk assessment for the process, for the batch record reviews, and it's about, what are the ways that process would fail and what are the mitigations that need to be put in place. That's the issue. So I think the key in here is going to be, finding the real root cause and not relying on typically, as you said, the human errors and the trainings as a fix for it, especially if you have repeat issues, etc. Not everything is going to be necessarily, easily discovered by going and interviewing people like Jose. But, at the end of the day, you really do need to figure out when an event occurs, what happened to the deviation? What's the sequence of events that led to that deviation, and be able to basically concisely state what the problem is, and then go after the root cause. Use the right tools to find out what the root cause are. And typically we use either 5 whys or the fishbone diagrams, the Ishikawa diagrams, etc. But, at the end, I think it's going to be, if it is a process issue or procedure issue, then, it goes back to the risk assessment of that process and the failure modes.
Yeah, so just to add to that, we're talking about risk assessment. So in the situation you described where, you're worried about all the other operators, I can consider that kind of following the herd mentality, doing what everybody else was doing, going into like how, if I, put my audit hat on, my old FDA hat back on, I'd say, well, how did you assess all the other stuff that happened? Did you truly have product at risk? And prove to me that the product wasn't at risk. So it's one of those big, gnarly, hairy investigations that nobody wants to do. But in that type of situation, when you figure that out, you're going to need to do it.
I agree. I think what I really like about this whole scenario and the path that it led me down was when we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about data integrity, quality culture, aging facility, investigations, and risk management, right? As being areas that we would focus in on. So in this one little example, to me, it touched everything. And if I were if I could walk in an audit and pull up an example like this, I could really assess in one deviation or a series of deviations the health of the organization. And from what I've described, I say it casts shadows on aging facilities. Obviously, if the batch record was that poorly designed, it's an old one, right? And the risk mitigation, there was no plan in place for when this all came about to mitigate those batches from the other operators, right? And there was data integrity because we don't know what the other operators were doing. Were they lying, not lying, but waiting and just signing like they signed at the point? There's a whole lot going on in that. So have you, I'm going to ask Seyed first. Seyed, have you ever run across a situation where, people have chalked it up to human error when it's really so much more? And how did you mitigate that?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, when something goes wrong, it either is attributed to the process, that something went wrong there. It's attributed to a human error, or the training wasn't effective, right? And definitely human errors are the ones that are referred to the most. As a matter of fact, in the medical device, with the IEC 6366, which is the usability, the whole term, user error went away, and it's all about use error, right? It's about what are the ways that while you're using it, you can't just blame the user for it, but you just have to look at what could go wrong. And that's all part of, if you have to look back at how to go about solving that problem, it's about your process and procedures, and then it's about the validation of that process. It's about the risk analysis for that process to see what the problems are. And speaking of, looking at this, holistically, if you see that there is a trend, it would or it should lead you to a CAPA, so that you could look at it, and actually prevent that problem from happening, and in the future, and by taking the proper corrective action. So overall, I think this is all about having the right procedures in place and not falling back on the lowest hanging fruit, which is the human error, and getting to the right root cause. And even though sometimes you may not be able to actually get to the right, the proper root cause, but you definitely need to have a probable root cause, because you just don't have enough information, or you do not have the ability to reproduce the problem, etc. But the bottom line is that root cause analysis is going to be the key.
Steve, I'd like to kind of pose the same question to you, but I would like you to take it from a little bit different perspective. In Steve's biography, we found out that he used to work for the FDA. So I would like you to take it from you're a regulatory inspector out there and you run across a situation like this and you see human error, how do you look at that? I mean, what does that do to you as a regulator?
Yeah, I mean, you think about whether it be the FDA or other global health authorities, something they've been concentrating on for, God, you think about almost a decade now. Because you come into a firm to do an inspection and you'd see human error, and it turned in over time. You're looking at it, it's a cop out. It's an easy excuse because anything you could chalk up to human error. But like, from a regulatory perspective, if you have a bunch of those, and say for instance you're a person or you're a company right now that has a bunch of these, and you're getting inspected, so I would expect that the investigator or the inspector, if it's outside the FDA, is going to really dig into those to see are they truly human errors, because a lot of times it's an easy excuse where you say human error, move on, we've retrained the person and moved on. But again, you're not getting down to that root causes side I was talking about it, because you think about it, anything, I mean, people make mistakes. I mean, I make mistakes, you make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. So you got people working processes, and processes make up your overall system. So right off the bat, inherently your system's fallible, so you could call anything a human error. But what is truly the reason why that human, me, you, whoever it may be, made that issue? So getting down to it, getting down to the root cause, or looking at it from the investigation perspective into the CAPA. So how did you get down to what it was? Is it truly your processes? Is it a procedure that's screwed up? Kind of like, the batch record. Was that batch record we were talking about with Jose, has it been reviewed on, an annual biannual basis, which should be being done, and they didn't catch it? Why didn't they catch it? Is it something where they're not asking the right questions, stuff like that within the process? Stuff like that. Those are things that come to mind for sure. It's an easy excuse. From a regulatory perspective, and I would say if you have a bunch of them, and you got a problem, because the regulators are eventually going to really dig in on an inspection and start figuring out what is going on. And I've heard, either clients or companies I've worked with in the past where within their investigation systems, deviation system, whatever you want to call it, they're putting in those kind of layers of questions. Like, for instance, if you have something that pops up as a human error, then they can't just stop at that. The procedure, or if it's an electronic system, it makes you go an extra couple layers and trying to get down to it to make sure it is. So kind of putting those kind of procedural controls in place so that you don't end up at that. I've seen that happen with multiple companies. So something to think about.
Perfect. Okay, let's go on to a little bit different. We're auditing for manufacturing quality, obviously, and now with the pandemic, of course, virtual audits are huge because people aren't traveling and we have social distancing, and so most of that, in I guess, will be a paper review, but can we talk about what documents somebody might want to request to review so they can get the most out of this virtual audit and assess these 5 areas of data integrity, quality culture, investigation, CAPAs, et cetera, et cetera. Let's start with you, Seyed. What would you, and just for the audience, Seyed speaks from a very device perspective, and Steve is speaking from the pharmaceutical perspective, but I think there's so much overlap in these areas that their advice is good for either one of you. But Seyed, what could you recommend that you would look at to get the most out of a virtual audit, kind of a paper review?
Yeah, so when you look at the virtual audits, there's definitely some differences, and then you have to keep those in mind. And getting prepared for the virtual audit is going to be the key to successful virtual audit, right? And when we look in terms of information prior to the audit, asking for some of the SOPs or charts, quality manual, etc., ahead of the audit is going to be the key. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that now, before on-site audit, it was either printed information or it was within the firewall of the company that you were looking at information. Now you're exposing it to internet, and there are other things to be considered, whether it's the GDPR or HIPAA or any sort of cybersecurity information to ensure the privacy of the information is kept intact. Also, it's all about the technology and then what sorts of setup you have. It's those types of things that I think it's going to be the key. But from the perspective that now information, for example, if the information is being shared in a video conference setup and it's being shared live, it's a little bit different environment. It's not like you don't have paper in front of you and you're not taking time and highlighting and doing things. It's just that you got to be prepared a little bit different than if you were on site. And just making sure that in terms of the good news, I'm just going to go there first. The good news is that when you don't have to travel and then you could get the right expertise, etc., I think it helps the auditors from that perspective, and it's really good from that perspective to have the right people involved with this, and then you could have more than the number of people that you would have had on site. But the other aspect of it is that when you're preparing for the audit, you got to make sure that you're accounting for the time differences, whether the equipment's work, what happens if you, for example, are doing something that ensure if you're moving with your video equipment, etc., that you don't have dead spots, etc. All of those you have to just make sure that it's taken care of, because those are going to be the key, as I said before, to having a successful virtual audit. And I'm going to stop there.
Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
You were saying what kind of things to request. I mean, because I was getting at, I think, from doing a virtual audit, personally, I think it takes more upfront work in your audit preparation than it is if you're actually going to do an on-site audit. And why do I say that? So, we've done multiple virtual audits in the company. I've done a lot of them. So you got to think through what you're going to ask for, how you're going to ask for it, and does the company even have it? You think about, the kind of the order of things you're going to ask. Whereas you get on site, you can ask the questions, you can be reactive, and they can bring the paper document to you and so forth. So from that perspective, takes a little bit more time. As a Marine colonel I went to grad school with said, prior planning precludes poor performance in virtual audit. That's definitely the case. I think besides, the standard kind of document you request, think about it, how do you start out? How do you get a good flavor for the overall site or the company, for instance, like site master files and stuff like that. But then what do you need to do to narrow in and kind of focus in on, try to get to those key issues? And that's where your deviations, kappas, and so forth come into play. But some other things that I like to request, of course, again, I mentioned metrics earlier. So give me your quality metrics and give it to me for the past year or two, just to see kind of if you can gather some trends yourself, and that can help you focus in on certain areas to look at during the audit. But another one I ask for is the quality plan. And if they have a quality plan, that's good. It kind of gives you the idea of what they're planning for that year or beyond. But also the absence of a quality plan, to me, is also another indicator of quality culture. So why don't you have a quality plan? You don't feel like you need to plan quality for the company for the year? And quality being operations and everything else that goes into what FDA considers the quality unit, which is not just quality. So stuff like that. So those are some quick ideas. So
Excellent. If we're auditing for manufacturing quality, one of the things that most people want to do is tour the line, which in some cases is acceptable. In the case of like a parenteral drug, you can't really go in the line unless you're properly trained and gowned. But is there a way to conduct a virtual tour of the line that's acceptable and plausible? It's sometimes hard enough to do a tour of the line when you're there in person, but now that we're in some ways virtual, how can that be done? Anybody have good suggestions on how a facility tour could be managed effectively virtually? Let's start with Steve.
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. So we've definitely done this before. So, and we actually involved. We have like 360 cameras and stuff. So also, first off, it depends on the facility. And, most newer facilities have, the walls are lined with glass, where you can actually see in, and then it makes of course, for inspection from a regulator perspective, they can see in and they don't have to go in because they can, of course, again, you got to be trained to get into those more higher classified spaces. So that helps using those cameras. I've seen other companies use plain old iPhones now. Using an iPhone or a Samsung, whatever the heck you're using, just make sure whoever's holding the phone doesn't have their hand over the mic, because if you can't hear anything, that just makes the auditor or the inspector kind of mad, and you don't want to make the auditor or inspector mad. But also, I would say those kind of things, whether it be 360 camera, regular camera, test out your signal strength around the facility. So, for instance, a lot of times, the investigator or the auditor wants to get into the mechanical spaces. Those places are notorious for having bad signal strength. So, in this weird era, this pandemic we're in now, which doesn't seem to be going away, and then, as you know, if you're following FDA kind of policy right now, that we're expecting some kind of virtual inspection guidance sometime in the future. So making sure you might have to put some signal boosters around or repeaters in your facility to make sure you have good strength, because you want to be able to see everywhere. And as an auditor, I still have the people go in there. Another thing to mention, to think about is, can you actually take a video ahead of time, like a video tour? Have somebody record that ahead of time. Now, in an inspection, they might want to see stuff live, or auditor might want to see stuff live, but it's something you can do ahead of time and offer that. Or at least in an audit or something, you can say, here's kind of like the beginning, and then the auditor, or inspector, or investigator can say, I want to go into this area, so let's go there live. And then a lot of companies within those more classified spaces have dedicated, communication equipment, whether it be a phone or dedicated iPhones or whatever it may be. So you can use those for the video capability as well. Those are some quick thoughts, Sue, for you.
Seyed, do you have anything to add to that you would consider? Hello, did we lose Seyed?
Sorry, I was on mute. For the most part, I think Steve covered, a lot of good points. But I think having a 360-degree camera obviously will help a lot. However, I think in addition to what Steve said, that to prepare maybe videos ahead of time, and then you could supplement that with the going live, etc. But also using presentations and process flows. Other things to complement your virtual tour is also very helpful, since you're not there. And at the end of the day, this is all about having the right technology, ensuring that it works. As Steve said, there might be dead spots that you may not have good signal, etc. So just working through those issues and having done some work ahead of time, I think it's going to be the key to having this happen. At the end of the day, it is possible to do it, but is it 100%? Not really, but it definitely helps to complement it with other tools to get a better picture of what's going on the floor.
Steve, we have a follow-up question from one of our audience members who's asking, what are the typical elements of a quality plan? Can you run through that quickly?
Sure, let me think about it. So essentially, it's your plan for quality. How do you plan to implement quality in across your organization or your company? So a lot of companies start out with strategically, what is quality going to work on in the next 3 or so years? Then how do you turn that into actual plans from a strategy? So what are your objectives for the year? So you think about how you do objectives for your overall organization. If you have people under you, start out with, here's the objective. Me as the supervisor, this is my objective. How am I going to assure that it happens? I'm going to relay those, trickle those objectives down. So usually that's how it starts: is what do we want to do? Want to do it? And then what kind of metrics are we going to use to make sure it actually is happening? And if we have to do any kind of course correction, it's as simple as that. It's a regular plan, but it's how you're going to implement and assure quality across the organization.
Is it related to a quality manual?
Stuff out there, Sue. Go ahead, Sue.
Oh, I was just going to ask, is it relatable to a quality manual?
Now, quality manual is part of it, and that's quality manual is your overall stuff, overall thing. But quality plan is different. I mean, I guess the basic way, if you haven't look at the ISO 9001 quality kind of system. And Seyed can talk a lot more of that than I, but quality planning is part of that.
Seyed, quality plan. Tell us what.
Yeah.
Tell us what you know.
Yeah. In addition to what Steve said, at the end of the day, I mean, you have it's all there's a tie back to everything else you do. So you have management controls, and then you're monitoring the health of your quality system, and things come up. And your quality plan basically is a plan to address all those issues, and not only address those, but also be proactive in terms of looking at the indicators and then basically predicting it ahead of time and putting the proper controls in place. So that would be, basically your quality plan. Just ensuring, that as you said, Sue, before, that the health of your quality system is kept intact.
Yeah, and the reason I said that, Sue, is for me, it kind of shows how reactive a company could be. If they actually have a plan, maybe they're not as reactive, as they could have been, they were if they didn't have a plan. That's why I said the absence kind of tells you a little bit.
Okay. Now, how? Let's relate that to one of the areas that we were looking at auditing, of course, is risk management plan, and how is the quality plan similar, different from, and part of the risk management plan? Let's go ahead and start with Seyed. What do you think about that?
Risk management plan. Yeah, this is definitely one of the key elements. And on the device side, we basically have a risk management file that has a risk management plan. Then it has your risk management or the risk analysis and a risk management report at the end. But your plan basically is going to list out what are you going to do, what are your methods for estimating risk and decisions criteria. It's about what are the deliverables, as you develop the product and the medical device world. It's about how are you, going to complete what we call the preliminary hazards analysis, but where we look at the intended use, we look at the claims, etc., and then we basically ask a couple of different questions. What happens if we fail to perform per our intended use? And the second question is, what happens if the performance is degraded? What are the impacts? Could it result in, it's just that method of how you go about solving those problems is going to be there. It's about, what are the methods and how are you going to document your risk analysis? And the criteria for, you have failures in the system that you detect. Not all of them lead to a hazardous situation, and not all hazardous situations lead to a harm. And what is your criteria that at what point in time you require risk controls? And then once you put the risk controls in, it's all about evaluating the overall residual risk and what's acceptable. And then it's about, how do you go about, selecting the right, risk management is a team effort. How do you go about making sure that you have a complete team members to do the risk analysis? And then the training, what sorts of training they require. And then at the very end, it's just like, how do you go about your risk benefit analysis, because you may have not, reduced the risk to an acceptable level, but your risk benefit analysis basically says, the technology available and what we have to do, et cetera, at the end of the day, the risk compared to the benefit that the product brings in is lower. The benefit is a lot more. So those are the aspects that I would say you need to basically address in your risk management plan.
Steve, your thoughts? Additional thoughts on risk management?
Yeah, I think so. I raised my hand in the air like I was clapping or cheering when you said risk management is a team effort. So think about it. Whatever in devices, the requirements are pretty darn clear about this, but in drugs, it's not so much. The CFRs talks about risk, it alludes to risk, but how do you manage risk? That comes down to. And so, for instance, you think about a risk management plan. So what are you trying to, number one, what's the risk you're trying to manage, or risks? How do you assess that risk, and then how do you mitigate that risk? And there's multiple different parts, and of course there's all kinds of different ways, like a failure mode effects analysis and so forth. Like an example of, we talked about data integrity earlier in your presentation, Sue. So the concept of I call it a data lifecycle process map. So what are you trying to assess? You want to make sure your data has integrity, and what goes in and what comes out it has the integrity. Bottom line. So who does that? So if you're thinking about a chromatograph or something like that. So is it just the lab person, or do you need the other person to kind of assess kind of the overall process? Or think about a production line or something. It could be multiple examples. But is it just Joe Schmo who lives in the validation department, or is it a cross-functional team? Cross-functional team of people that look at the various risks around whatever process it may be, whether it be that chromatography process or a production process, filling or packaging or whatever that is. And then how is it reviewed? How is it assessed? And the key word that keeps coming to my head is the word deliberative. It's not just kind of reactionary and people throwing spaghetti at the proverbial wall and hoping the spaghetti sticks. But how are you thinking through it in a deliberative manner, assessing the risk, and then with the risk itself, how do you know it's a risk? I mean, is it a true risk, or is it a perceived risk? Going back to, what's the ultimate objective of what you're doing. So planning it out, being deliberative, and having a cross-functional team if you need a cross-functional team. Now, you don't need to have a team for everything, so that goes into the upfront planning.
Okay. We talked about quality culture, and I think when you're on site doing an audit, it's easier to determine if you're kind of have quality culture problems or not, because you're going to be observing the way people behave in their natural environment. It sounds like we put them in a zoo. No, I'm sorry, but it's a little bit harder, I would think, from a virtual perspective to assess the quality culture, the health of the quality culture in an organization. So what do you guys recommend, and we'll start with Steve, regarding what type of information I should be looking at when I'm auditing virtually to determine the health of the quality culture and its impact on my manufacturing quality.
I guess just a quick kind of example that comes to mind to look at is, think about, you're going to be looking at investigations already. So the thing to assess when you're looking through the investigation is, again, going back to what we were talking, Seyed and I were talking about with the risk management area. How do they tackle the investigation? So you think about, are they just looking at the thing like with blinders on? Are they just focusing on like what's in front of their face? Or are they going, I call it going deep and wide? They're saying it's kind of the what ifs. What else could there be, or what, besides just what is. So what is should be documented, of course. But then again, as you'll see in a lot of, if you're reading warning letters, you're seeing the FDA says this all the time across devices and drugs, is you didn't take, thorough and substantive corrective action because you only focused on with right in front of your face. You were like a horse with blinders on. You didn't see that, you focused on this one issue that happened with this one product, but the house was burning down to your right, but you just didn't see that and you didn't tackle that. So thinking about little things like that and how they document it. How do they document the investigation? A lot of times you can tell pretty quick if it's just a couple lines, or if it's a bigger investigation and you couple pretty substantive paragraphs. It should be. And if it's not there, that just adds some more questions. That's just a quick thought too.
Okay. Seyed, you've been working with quality culture for a while. Do you have any additional thoughts on how to determine the health of a quality culture virtually?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. At the end of the day, when you look at the quality culture, it's all about what is the top management's commitment to that, how engaged are the employees, because quality isn't about, it's about everybody being involved, and your processes have to be ingrained, into that whole concept of quality culture. And the bottom line, I think, from when you're looking at it virtually, is as you interview people, as you talk to them, as you look at their procedures, etc. You got to be able to judge. Are they using a critical thinking to solve the problems, as Steve said, for example, for investigation? Are the risk-based approach being used? Are they paying attention to their KPIs, and how are they going about doing the improvements? Things that you could take a look at from that perspective, because those are some of the practical ways of looking at their quality culture and seeing if they are basically doing some of the right things. Are these people, when they're when you're interviewing them and talking to them, are they basically parroting a something that is well rehearsed, versus as you ask questions, etc., to get them to talk to you more about exactly how do they go about doing the process and procedures. Are they afraid to bring up when there are issues and problems, for example? Those are some of the things that I think we can assess, as we look at them virtually, in terms of the prevalence of their quality culture, and then whether they understand all the benefits that they get out of their quality culture and what the impacts are.
It sounds like I don't know that forever we'll be doing virtual audits. I do think that virtual audits are becoming more and more part of the portfolio of a company to be able to conduct virtual audits, and I don't see them going away necessarily anytime in the future, and not just because of the pandemic, because I think we've learned to kind of manage a little bit doing virtual audits. But my next question is, to conduct an effective virtual audit, to participate in it from either the auditee, auditor end, or even just someone who you're interviewing, what additional training, if any, do you think people should get or have in order to maximize the impact or maximize the effect of the virtual audit? In other words, how to make it more effective overall. Is there some training that could be offered to help improve people's skills around this whole virtual audit, virtual question, virtual interviews? Let's start with you, Steve.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just training around being able to use the tools that you might need to use during a virtual audit. So simple as, do you know how to use Zoom if you're going to use Zoom? Or a lot of us use Microsoft Teams. Can you use that? Can you use the various collaboration kind of tools within those overall platforms? Do you know how to upload and maneuver within some kind of secure electronic shared e-room that people are using for virtual audit, stuff like that? And also just, overall presentation skills, because a lot of times, it's the type of, you want to be able to present and talk clearly and concisely, and stuff like that. Is it just some quick thoughts?
Seyed, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, the virtual audits, it's hard to read body language, and there's some adjustments. And I agree with you 100% that they're here to stay. I mean, it's not going to replace on-site audits, but, I would venture to guess that there will be a percentage of the audits in the future, maybe it's a third or a little bit more, that will stay in this virtual mode. And the interesting thing is that the ISO 19011, for example, the 2018 version of it, the guidelines for auditing management also covers the remote audits. And it's all about, as Steve said, it's about the tools, techniques, and the processes and the best practices for conducting virtual audits for both the auditors and the auditees. And speaking of training, ASQ already provides a virtual audit training class for both internal and external audits. So that's definitely something that is readily available right now, or the companies can develop their own based on what they have learned from this past year.
Great. Let's kind of keep on that theme for a little bit. People get, when you're in person live at an audit, right, and you can observe people's behavior, body language, and it's a little bit different kind of an interview approach. So when you're virtual, you're not going to have that one-on-one, that ability to view. Is there some tips that you can give for getting that same kind of experience virtually? Are there certain questions you should be asking in certain ways as far as conducting audit interviews during a virtual audit? Let's start with you, Seyed.
Yeah, I think, because you have that lack of ability to judge the body language, I think the preparation and then asking for information ahead of time and getting ready for it is going to be the key. And as you said, it's all about asking the right questions and then being able to critically think on the fly as you're basically asking questions from your the people that you interview. So I think that is going to be the key. There is you gotta. I mean, we talked about getting not only the procedures but getting the process artifacts, whether these are the backlog of CAPAs, complaints, other pieces of information that is going to give you some idea of where they are is going to be the key. And as I said before, when you're talking to people, I think instead of just for you to look at the procedures, etc., I think it's good to have some open-ended question from people to say, hey, how are you using this process, and then what are the how do you approach it? What are the steps? For example, if I'm in on a manufacturing and then they're using measurement equipment, just for example, if they are using a caliper to measure, let's just say, the inner diameter of a tube, and that's a critical element that they do. And if I see that they're using calipers, and I know, for example, that calipers, when you drop them, you're supposed to recalibrate. So I would ask them, hey, just tell me a little bit about what happens if you drop the caliper. Do you have anything in your procedure, or what do you go about doing this? So those are the types of things that we want to do, because we're not there to observe things, and then it's in terms of the body language, etc. So we have to be more prepared. I think that's going to be the key.
Steve, your thoughts on that?
No, I can't agree with what Seyed said even more. I think the preparation is key. I mean, thinking about what kind of questions you want to ask. I mean, starting out maybe with some more open-ended questions, just kind of see how people respond to them, and then focusing in from there is something I would suggest using where and when appropriate. I mean, the other thing to think about, since you can't watch the body language, is if you're on video, of course you can watch eyes, and also the other thing I use is vocal inflection. I mean, if somebody gets real high in a voice like this and they start talking like this, maybe they're a little bit nervous about something. That gives you kind of potentially an indicator to dig in on. Of course, during a face-to-face on-site interview, you can see how the vocal tone goes versus the body language and all that other stuff to make a better assessment. But in the lack of that, you have try different things.
So a lot of it is actually the preparation. So if I'm going to be the auditor, and maybe I'm preparing for my first virtual audit, my first activity, I think, would be to ask for certain documentation from the site that I'm going to audit. What might some of that documentation include? What would I want to ask for off the bat right away to get me started? Because I'm going to take this information and kind of mull it over before I go back and make my requests, further requests. So let's start with Steve. What should I be asking for to get me started on my road to my first virtual audit regarding manufacturing quality?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's ever been through like an FDA inspection before, think about what the investigator asks either right ahead of time or as soon as they sit down when they read off a list of about 800 different things that they want you to compile. So think about, give me your SOP list, your site master file, give me a list of your deviations for the past 2 years or since the last inspection, give me a list of your CAPAs, give me a list of your change controls, give me a list of your complaints. If you have a quality manual, give me your quality manual. If you have a quality plan, give me your quality plan. Just some of those things right off the bat that the way I look at it is it kind of gives you the overall kind of picture of the company and the site, and your P&IDs, like your process and how the facility is laid out and the different pieces of equipment, validation master plan, stuff like that.
Seyed, what would you add?
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree any more with Steve. I mean, it's just by looking at those documents and then, taking a risk-based approach to determine where do you want to spend your time. If I, for example, going back to my caliper example, if I'm looking at measurement equipment and I see that they have had issues and problems with that, whether it's calibration, that the stickers weren't there, etc., then I definitely would want to get more into those areas. So it's, again, going back to the getting information ahead of time, preparing, looking at those, and taking a risk-based approach to your audit is the way to go.
How does AI, well, not AI, but computer systems, cybersecurity, because with regard to like laboratory systems, if I'm looking for data integrity issues, I might want to follow an audit trail in a laboratory system, or permissions. How do I get that? How does that play in here in terms of auditing virtually? I mean, it's kind of hard to, I guess, when I have trouble with my computer and I get Apple on the line and they go, let me take over your computer and start maneuvering it, it makes me a little scared. So how, right? How does that kind of cybersecurity, how do we keep that secure and yet allow for that auditor to be able to look into those kind of data integrity issues that might persist in a laboratory? Seyed, let's start with you, and then Steve, just follow on when Syed's done.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And one of the bigger problems that you need to solve ahead of time is exactly that, in a sense that you're not on site and you're going over, you're using technology basically, and then that's why you have to have your IT department involvements, et cetera, and then assess that the technology that you're going to use for this, is it secure? Is it, something that you could share all of this information that you want, not only from the cybersecurity perspective, but also from the privacy perspective too. So definitely that is a part of preparing. Not necessarily all of these pieces of technology that we use aren't designed to be secure. So I think you have to keep that in mind. And sometimes you may not be able to share, and you may have to have a different way to sharing that information, whether that's through secure data rooms, et cetera, and it may not be via your, online presentations, et cetera. So that's one aspect of it. But at first, I thought you were going with the validation of these systems, et cetera, and the audit trails, and then how do you, because all of that information goes hand in hand with your data integrity and making sure that you are the data integrity is intact from the beginning or throughout the life cycle of the data itself, and that is absolutely another element of this whole concept of the validation of what you use in getting that information and up to the point that you use it and then store it, archive it. It just goes hand in hand with all your data governance. It goes hand in hand with your data retention. All of those come into picture. But when we look at it, it's all about the life cycle. It's all about the organization being able to determine the level of risk of these documents and the processes, and being able to handle it as such. I think it's going to be the key. And then determining what they can and what they cannot share, and what the cybersecurity risks, the privacy risks are, and what are the alternative, and then how are they going to mitigate those. Let me stop here and get some information from Steve.
No, all valid stuff for sure, because in this world, being able to share this stuff securely is going to be key, and you want to be able to share it. So I guess the thing we were talking about earlier, planning ahead of time with your IT people, making sure everything is secure enough. Now, and also don't assume that it is. Work with your IT people to make sure that's the case, because in an audit or in an inspection, with a health authority. You don't want to not be able to share something because that leads to another indicator that maybe you're hiding something. And then they start, of course, the regulators and FDA will start the delayed denying the inspection guidance. From the other aspect, I think once you have assured all that you're secure and you're not hackable and all that as much as possible. Like for instance, I've been in my head since Sue mentioned it. If you talk about you want to review an audit trail. So a lot of the technologies that we're all using nowadays, like Microsoft Teams, you can easily share your own screen. I would say don't give control of it, but you can do a live demonstration within the live system. And I've done it before on audits myself, and I've seen other people do it. Where show me an audit trail. So you could give ahead of time the inspector or the auditor has the document, whether it be electronic or whatever it is. So you have the document, show me how you did it, and show me in the system where it's at. And they either you can walk them through, or they can point to, let's go here, show me this, show me that. So you can do that in a live thing, live environment, and that'll help too, especially those type of electronic systems. Get that live demo and let them tell you, we can give you a demo. Would you like us just to show you how it works? Or would you like us to go and, do you want to focus on something specific? And let them, especially on the inspection side of things, it's an investigator, let them take their lead and go from there. Back to you, Sue.
Yeah, let's go. Let's kind of keep on this just a little bit. There, kind of a twist to this, but and we're going to start with Steve because you were the regulatory authority at one point. So, do companies ever deny showing regulatory agencies the quality plan or their risk management plan if it could be damaging to share? And if they do, what kind of are the ramifications down the road of refusing to show or share a document? The only document I can think of that's really kind of outside is your internal audits, right? Where you aren't obligated to share them with the regulatory authorities. But the rest of it I've not heard. So Steve, let's start with you from a regulator perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to ask for something, sometimes, especially on the health authority side, even on our side, you ask for stuff to see if you're going to get it. So sometimes, why are they asking for it? So quality plan, if you're not going to give your quality plan, that raises a big flag because they should be little things like that are part of your overall quality system. If it's related to the GMPs or any GXPs for that matter, from trials through supply chain stuff, and it has potential or has ramifications on the quality of a product, you're probably going to have to give it up. And if you don't give it up, it kind of points that you're probably, or you might be hiding something where it could turn the kind of mood of the inspection or the audit around pretty quick into a more tenuous situation. So you got to think about that. Why are they asking for it? Why do they need it? And it would behoove you, even your front room people, whoever dealing with the audit or inspector. Well, why do you need it? What are you trying to figure out? This is what it is, and kind of just having a general conversation. Don't be afraid to ask questions. So that's one piece of advice. And Sue, when we go back, you said your internal audits. Now the FDA has a compliance policy, so they do not routinely request those. So usually, because they want that to be part of the, it's an improvement tool within an own quality system, and they want companies to do audits. And the concern is if they start requesting them, companies will stop doing them because they don't want to basically shoot themselves in the foot. But on the flip side, FDA does and can and has, because I've done it myself when I was head of GMP compliance, requested internal audits. Now, a lot of questions, the discussions are had in the agency themselves, and then sometimes if it happens to, you have, pull in somebody from chief counsel, we'll have a lawyer conversation. We want this, and this is why we want this. But if that's the case, if they ask for an internal audit, right off the bat, that's definitely, you start asking questions. And you say, and then that's where, like, if one of the sites I covered when I got back out to industry as the compliance head, I would say in that kind of situation, the front room person or myself would say, we need to have some discussions behind the scene. Can we get back to you? So that's when you go back to your back, figure out what's going on. What actually do you think? You got to figure out, well, what's leading them to this to actually request it? I mean, it could be, usually at that point, if they're asking for internal audits, they have a suspicion something's going on and they want to get more information. And I'm thinking, when I've done it before from the regulatory perspective, when I was a regulator, I mean, it was pretty blatant there was a problem within a company, but routinely the FDA does not do that kind of request, not unless there's a big issue. Now, other health authorities do ask for that, so, around the world. So it's not, see, the FDA a lot of times don't. Other countries don't, but at the same time, you could get that kind of question.
Okay. And one of our attendees has actually noted that they have gotten requests for internal audits, and we're allowed to redact findings, but they have been coming from agencies. So everybody might want to be aware that that seems to be a growing trend. We have about 2 minutes left. Yeah. Hello?
So I'm going to add one quick thing. So
of course.
Sometimes inspectors or investigators will ask for it just to see if they get it. It's one of their little tricks that they do. So that's why I just behoove you, ask questions, go back and say, we'll get back to you.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes. So I am going to start with Seyed and say, what closing thoughts do you have for our audience regarding auditing for manufacturing quality? And then when Seyed's completed, Steve, you can give us the closing thoughts, and that'll bring us to the end of our hour and a half.
Yeah, no.
Seyed.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I think when we look at the bigger picture, I think, you did a great job of tying all these different things together, the data integrity, the quality culture, the investigations, the risk assessments, etc. But, and regardless of whether we're dealing with internal audits or external audits, and regardless of whether we deal with a virtual audit or on-site audit, there are, a set of good practices to be able to ensure a successful audit. And I think when we talk about virtual audits, definitely there is the preparation is going to be the key, and then you just have to make sure that the technologies we use, the types of things that we have to cover in terms of privacy, cybersecurity, etc. All of those things have been accounted for ahead of time, and then when it comes to performing the audit, as we talked about, the fact that we're not there, we don't see the body language, etc. It's just that we have to be more prepared and be able to ask better questions and be able to get to the outcomes that we're looking at from both the auditee and auditor perspective. Overall, yeah.
Steve.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so again, great, as usual, good job pulling this all together. You keep us going. And I thank FDA News for asking me to be part of this. I'm humbled by that. I guess the closing thought is we've talked about, data integrity, quality culture, virtual audits, all these different things we've talked about today. But it all comes back to me as the overall culture of your organization, and it's quality culture, no matter what you're making. And the one thing I like to wrap up with, I love quotes, but W. Edwards Deming, a quality guru, who started this back in the 50s after World War II in Japan. He had a quote, how it ties directly into everything we've talked about. The quote goes, "People work in the system. Management creates the system." Anytime you're doing any investigation or whatever, think that one through. So people work in the system, management creates the system. And that came from the 1950s from W. Edwards Deming, and how true is that even in the year 2021?
And with that, I think, Craig, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap us up today.
Well, thank you, Sue, and Seyed and Steve. Thank you as well. And I'd also like to thank our participants for joining us today. be sure to fill out the survey at the conclusion of this webinar. Your feedback is very important to us. We're going to conclude today's webinar. If you hope you have a great day and hope you join us again in the future. Thank you.